All right, looking at final projects part two, the newspaper column ads. These can be tricky. I understand. I've done these a bazillion times, and I shouldn't say rarely, but they're really fun. Because usually it's kind of like, yeah, shove this 10 pounds of garbage into a 5 pound bag, which is kind of what I gave you, sort of the task I gave you, sort of purposely to sort of give you that kind of like having to work with an uncomfortable amount of information and making it work. So with that said, let's start taking a look. All right. Yeah, I think this is a really good start. I think that your logos are pretty huge. For these being essentially secondary logos, the main sponsor is Lens Crafters with the Site Night, and I guess they're all sort of primary sponsors, but I might make these a little bit smaller. I know the 3 logos, and this goes for everybody, the 3 logos are sort of awkward sizes on purpose. So what happens often as a designer is that you're given shapes or logos specifically that are very, very different shapes, and you kind of have to make them like optically visually look about the same size, right? So being different shapes, you sort of have to have that balance between, if you think about kerning and have that like, the optically even amount of space in between letters. It's a similar kind of concept. Like they're not all going to be the same size, obviously, because they're very, very different shapes. But, again, you can sort of balance them enough using positive, negative space specifically to have them appear about the same size. So definitely make these smaller. You can kind of spread them out across the bottom. Definitely make them smaller. Make sure this might look a little stretched. Make sure that you're not stretching these logos. Very important for everybody. You got to make sure that we're holding shift or using the scale tool. I mentioned that in class the other day, something like that, so that you're not stretching your logos. I think that your headline and sort of tagline work really well. I think your middle block of text could be reworked slightly. So I think making these a little bit smaller would give you more room to open things up if you wanted to drop all of this down slightly, and then you could increase your headline. So your trick or treat for a cause on Site Night could be large. You could actually make this registration mark much, much smaller. That can stay at about a 10-point font, so it doesn't take up so much room. But yeah, you can have this. This go across the top, and then you can still have your line. I like how your line breaks up the space. Center it a little bit more, and then have your Site Night here, and then even have your tagline a little bit larger here, or even at the bottom if you sort of wanted to bookend it the way you have it, but make both of these a little bit bigger to fill up that space. And then you could potentially have this logo, since you'll open up space by making these smaller. Your logo could effectively kind of fit in a space like that. And then you could kind of, rearrange this a little bit. I would definitely make this, sort of main informational block smaller. And then even just throwing something a little bit bold on this one to make that contact information a little bit more noticeable, separate it maybe a little bit more, a different weight, a different size, that kind of thing. Decreasing the size of this block may help on that. So you want that contact information is relatively important right for this ad. So I think with some minor tweaks, I think this could go really long way. This is a super solid start. There we go. So for this one, I think we could use potentially a little bit more personality. Definitely breaking up these text blocks a bit. I like the idea of having, this main logo and then the 3 logos underneath. It's a good start to sort of try to optically make these look like they're about the same size. You could potentially decrease this a tiny bit or move it up to the left a little. And then I like what you have going here. If you made your Lens Crafters logo, I'm thinking maybe not quite as wide as this, but just about, and centered it, and then made these a little bit larger. You can kind of have these 3 in a group, almost a square shape or a rectangular shape to sort of match that and have it underneath. So if you wanted to have this be, this area, the left side of your ad here be logos. And then, maybe revamp this font a little bit. Again, we can make that registration mark a lot smaller. And, sort of arranging this text, again, having like the middle block, be not that it's not important, but have that be a little bit smaller. Maybe having your tagline a little bit bigger, and then again your information, your contact information a little bit larger. Again, a different style, different weight, etc. And then you can have this lens crafters thing, tucked into the bottom corner here, something like that. All right. So for this one, I'll open it up in Illustrator. Hope I don't have that font. So not knowing what font that is, it's a little bit hard for me to see that. But so there's a few things going on here. I think you have potentially some good ideas. But again, we need to pay attention to assignment specifics. This is a black and white ad, so it's going in newspaper, right? So we're only dealing with black and white. In which case, I might stay away from textures unless you go with a really, really, really light opacity on your textures. And I would definitely stay away from using textures. Is this a blend? No. I would definitely stay away from using textures in a logo. You're sort of effectively distorting a logo, and clients don't like that. So I would just make sure, and again, sort of make sure that you're not losing pieces of this. I see it's ungrouped, so just make sure that all your pieces are staying intact. So going with your main logo in the middle, as you can see, is kind of tricky. It's kind of tricky to arrange all of the other elements, your headline and your information, and the other logos around something like that that's sort of that blocky. So I may go with either picking a corner, a top left or right corner, or left side, things like that. And then again, readjusting these logos to make sure that they're visually or optically about the same size, that they appear balanced. And then definitely revamping, again, not knowing what this font is, I would either outline that, or when you export, this is what I have you guys export as JPEGs so that I can see, I don't have to worry about missing fonts. So without seeing that font, it's tough to tell. But definitely work on like a headline size, and then rearranging these blocks, the information and the contact information, sort of rearranging them. And again, not using color. So even again, if you liked this texture that you had, kind of coming from part one, if you wanted to make that black and white and then drop the opacity down so it wasn't distracting, like this, I think it's also the color choice. You have complementary colors going along here, so you have a little bit of that visual vibration happening. It's kind of hard to read. So definitely readjust your text and readjust your logos for sure to make sure that they're balanced in your design. Things are kind of just it looks like things are kind of just sort of thrown around the page here. You have a lot of this awkward negative space. The format even in this presentation isn't exactly balanced. If you were going to have something that was asymmetrical in balance, that's totally fine, but you have to make sure that even asymmetrical has a sense of balance rather than just kind of elements placed just sort of somewhat randomly on your page. So I would concentrate on those to improve this design. All right, let's take a look at the JPEG here. I'm going to blow it up, and hopefully it doesn't get too pixelated. Okay. So for this one, again, a pretty strong start. I like sort of how we have this arranged. It's a little bit different. And I think, again, some sizing issues, some balance issues could free up some space for your information, etc. I wouldn't put the drop shadows like this. You have drop shadows on everything, which is kind of distracting, especially with some of the smaller print. It wouldn't read well. I might leave the drop shadow maybe on this sort of graphic element logo. And then maybe even your headline, you could leave it, I might make this a little bit bigger, but you could leave that drop shadow here. but I would take it off of all the other elements. If this isn't 10 point, you can make it 10 point, certainly make it smaller. And sort of balance out these logos a little bit and either place them underneath here. But I kind of like how these are broken up. I might make, this a little bit smaller, even it out. You could do type in area if you made like a square, give or take about the size that you wanted it. And then adjust the text accordingly and have it fit, fit within that square area to sort of even out that space a little bit more. You almost have it here, but then these kind of break up a little bit. If you want to separate this and have, this be a little bit bigger, it's the 10th annual site night, and then have this block of text be much smaller and a little bit more even and compressed. And then, work on the spacing, again, visually, optically space these out and remove that drop shadow because it's, a client wouldn't like that. It's very distracting to their logos. I like the idea, but you see what I mean? And then again, maybe making this a more plain font, or even just having like for information and a free collection kit. And then you could have these be a little bit more bold, or, you could go with a more sort of straight up font with your information here and your information here, and then keep sort of a more stylized font for this, and then even like the 10th annual site night part of the tag. And then I feel like we're missing, because there's the help the world. What was it? No, I gotta go back. Help the world see this Halloween. There was that tag that I believe is missing. So even if you had that, across the bottom here, to help the world see, we'll make sure we don't drop any copy. But you see the general is, again, I think this is a solid start, and you've got some room to definitely improve a decent design. There we go, a little bit of a different look. Like that. I'm blowing these up a little bit bigger than they appear anyway. So again, strong start. I like the idea of the border. I think the border works well. Those often, something simple like that often sort of separates these column ads from each other, and you get, a page of just a bunch of small ads. I might make your main logo a little bit smaller. You can kind of keep it tucked up to the top left, but maybe make it a little bit smaller and give yourself a little bit more room to adjust this information. Definitely make this smaller. Again, you can make that like a 10 point and sort of tuck it to the bottom left corner here. I like the idea you have with these three logos. I might work on them a little bit, maybe make the Lions logo a touch smaller. But I like how you have this, sort of triangular shape with the optical space there working well. I might make it a little bit smaller. Again, if you can make this logo a little bit smaller and open up some breathing room, basically just kind of give this a little bit of breathing room. But we don't have the trick or treat. Again, make sure we're not dropping our headline. You have to use all the copy. So you could have either, again, if you made this smaller and had your trick or treat for a cause at the top, and then have the 10th annual site night, and then you could even, again, break up this information and have that much smaller. But I like how you have this, if you made this block a tiny bit smaller, have the for information and free collection kit, potentially on one line, and then maybe it's a little bit smaller to give this a little bit more breathing room, and then adjust this. But don't forget that headline. Again, I think making this a little bit smaller, still keeping it tucked top left, to free up a little bit of space, but just, kind of give everything a little bit of breathing room. As you can see, when you go give or take about, full size, it kind of is this one sort of big block that's kind of hard to read in one, full unit like that. So some visual breakup, I think, could help this a lot. All right, and then I think, we have like the opposite going on here with Sean's. I think there's way too much open space. I think this is a good start. I think moving down this logo a little bit, and then maybe make this headline larger and even go across the whole top. I like the font you chose. Again, we can make that registration mark way smaller. You can also keep that, more standard. Since it's just legal copy, you can kind of keep that a more standard font. Kind of like your copy right here. But maybe make this a full headline. Maybe not go all the way across, if depending on where you want to put this image. But if you go all the way across, drop this image down, make this much larger, and then maybe even make this a little bit smaller. And watch how many fonts that you're using. For the headline is great. And then even using these two taglines, and then I would just kind of stick to, a more simple font here and just different weights and sizes, rather than, I think this is like 1, 2, 3 at least. But you have a lot of different fonts going on, which can work. Again, I would, maybe use this information and have it, have these be, more similar font, and then have these two and third be different. And then make sure you're definitely distorting these logos when you're resizing. Make sure you're not distorting the logos. And again, I think just a little bit more, they're just about optically even, with the balance, depending on how they look when they're correctly sized, so they're not stretched. But I don't mind this amount of space. You could probably tighten it up a little bit, and you can kind of keep it tucked in this bottom right corner. And then as you drop this down, it'll balance a little bit. And then you can have the Help the World See This Halloween tucked down here, either on one line or two lines. And then this could open up this space a little more to arrange. I think you have a little bit too much negative space, and there's a little bit of imbalance happening in this design. But again, I think it's a strong start. All right. Up the illustrator just to make sure. Hopefully not missing fonts. Oh, okay. I cancel this thing. So it's asking me for placed images. Let's make sure we're not placing the images that we're copying and pasting. These are EPS files, so you can they're vector files, so you can open them up in Illustrator again. So when we're resizing and when we're using these images, they don't break up at all. And also this way we're not missing images. Again, I like the start for this one. I think we're missing a little bit of info, but the Trick or Treat for a Cause on Site Night I think works really well. You might be able to make that a little bit smaller. I like the border that you have happening. I think with both borders, it might be a little bit too much because you have the two borders and then you have this underline. So if you wanted to keep this border, I would lose this border. Because I think having all those lines is a little bit distracting. And again, you have an underline here, you have an underline here. So having all these different underlines and these different lines happening, I think is a bit visually distracting. I do like it here. So even if you lost this border and you wanted to keep this border here and then get rid of the two underlines here. But I think overall you have a strong start. Again, I think this is a decent size. You're missing the AAA logo. And again, between the Lens Crafters, the Lions, and the AAA logo, you might be able to optically size them so that they go across the bottom. This copyright info can be much smaller and a more just sort of plain font. You can even tuck it in the bottom right or left, depending on where it works in your ad. Some people have even had it run this way as long as it's on the page. I might make this a bit smaller. It reads, it's a little bit rough to read. It sort of reads again as like one big block, and it's kind of visually distracting. So even if you went with a more plain font for, or even if you had this, it's a 10th annual site night, be this font, and then have this information be smaller and sort of a more plain font. And then, it's definitely overshadowing the information, which is, probably the more important of the two. But if you sized your border a little bit smaller and gave your text a little bit more breathing room, I think it would read much better. Definitely make this block smaller, maybe a more plain font, and then you could make this a bit bigger and have it, again, sort of be more of a plain font, but play with different weights and sizes and things. I think with sort of a more display font, it's tough to read, actual information or important information. For headlines and taglines, I think it works really well. So, for your tag, Help the World See This Halloween, maybe even have that be outside of your border here. If your border ended here and then had your Help the World See This Halloween across the bottom, something like that. But again, I think it's a really strong start. I think there's a few things that are a little bit visually confusing, but easy to fix. But I like where you're going so far with it. Okay. All right, and then this one we have similar things happening. Again, a lot of organizational issues here. So if there's some feedback from previous pieces that we looked at that could be worked on. But definitely work on maybe a different font for your headline. Separate these logos. They're all over the place. They're different sizes. Again, you want to make sure that these three logos are optically weighted and distributed evenly, maybe even distributed across the bottom right of your page. And then have your site night, even if you wanted to have it at the bottom, definitely make it a bit larger. You're also definitely distorting that logo. Make sure we're not, when you're scaling, either holding down shift if you're doing it sort of manually by dragging, or use that scale tool. Again, that's why I mentioned it the other day, is I use the scale tool all the time, so that way I know I'm definitely not distorting the logo. But even you had it in the bottom right, sorry, you don't want it to be too huge, but maybe give or take here, and then have your trick or treat for a cause headline. It's the 10th annual site night, even on the left-ish side, and then you can sort of separate these these blocks a little bit more to give them a little bit more breathing room. Again, I think just some more attention to visual arrangement and balance, design balance, and informational balance, I think will go a long way with this piece. All right, and then so I'm just going to distort a little bit. Again, another strong start. I like the outline. I think this is a really strong start. I think some tweaks and things could go a long way here. Again, this registration mark doesn't need to be that big. I think these logos across the bottom are definitely way too large. So again, that sort of like optical balance between having these, a little bit smaller would free up some space. Again, if you wanted to keep it sort of in a similar format, definitely make these smaller. Maybe have these fit in an area, give or take about this big across 2/3 of the bottom, and then you could have your site night logo, be here across that other third and fill up that space, and then keep your headline about where it is. Maybe some arranging so site night isn't completely by itself, even that a little bit. Maybe trick or treat for a cause on site night. Depending on how it reads when you break it up. And I think informationally this works pretty well. Maybe just some rearrangement. Again, if you even just tweaking this and making these a little bit different weights and having the tagline be a little bit of a different weight, but basically separate these visually from this. You could make this even a touch smaller, but if you kept it about the same and made these a little bit bigger, depending on how much room you have when you free up this space, or when you fill up the space rather, but making these a little bit smaller might fill up some space, or free up some space rather. So if you have these three logos going across the bottom here, give or take, you would have a little bit more space here to play around. But I think an excellent start with some minor tweaks. Again, going along with these, I think your information reads well. I think just some minor tweaks with your text, emphasis on different parts of the text and different parts of the information can go a long way.